Kayla. Thank you so much for doing this today for us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about growing up, what family life was like?
So my childhood, my mom and my dad were separated. I did have an older sister who was 9.5 years older than me, and a younger brother who was 4.5 years younger. So I was the middle. Um, all of us had different fathers, and no father in the home. So my mom was an extremely hard worker, great provider. But as you can imagine, there was a lot of like dysfunction. Although we had stability, as far as like our home and knowing that we were going to have a meal at night and stuff like that, which we were very fortunate for. Um, there was just still a lot of chaos as far as my sister, who was 9.5 years older than us, kind of raising us from my mom, since my mom worked all the time. Um, so that was hard to an extent, but ultimately my childhood wasn't horrible. It was my adolescence that became really difficult. My dad was never really in my life. He was in and out of prison, so I always wanted that relationship with him, but never seemed to be able to gain his approval or be worthy of his time, is what it felt like to me. Um, so to kind of backstep a little bit, I had a really close relationship with his father and his grandmother. And those were the two people that I really remember feeling like loved me unconditionally as a child. And my great grandmother died when I was 6 years old. Or sorry, my grandfather died when I was 6 years old, and then my great grandmother died when I was 8 years old. So that was pretty traumatic for me, as far as feeling like the two people that like loved me no matter what were gone. And they were like my connection to my dad. Like, I didn't know if I was going to get to see my dad, but I knew I would get to see them. So yeah, that was extremely difficult. But then, um, we had, family traditions and stuff like that. I would get to see my aunts and stuff on my dad's side of the family, Thanksgiving, Christmas, that kind of thing. So I always looked forward to that. So that was kind of normal. But then my mom, she ended up marrying a Marine when I was 15. And then by the time I was 16, it was just a lot of turmoil, and she was gone a lot with him, trying to live in Jacksonville with him some, but, be a mom still to us and run a business. And I found myself taking care of my brother a lot, and started experimenting with marijuana and drinking, and just trying to like find ways to cope with everything. And then,
Was that like with neighborhood friends or friends at school? Or?
so a girl that I grew up with, yes, we actually didn't talk for several years, and then that's kind of what brought us back together, that common party scene. And I actually took my brother with me a lot because he was always with me.
How old was he then?
He was, right, if I was 16, he would have been 12. So he was exposed to a lot, and I, at the time, didn't realize what I was doing to him. And I think I was just so mad at my mom for her putting that on me that I didn't really care. So my brother and me, we got really, really close during our childhood. So I don't know. It was just hard having my mom there all the time and being able to be dependent on her, and then she wasn't there. And it was just a lot of erratic behavior I just remember being super angry at her and feeling like she was choosing this new guy over us. And we actually got into a really bad argument one day, and I told her just that I felt like she was choosing him over us. And she told me if I didn't like the way she was living, I could get out of her house. And that was when I was 16, and I never went back after that. Was homeless for 2 weeks, and then finally reached out to my dad with the encouragement of a really good friend of mine. She was like, you can't live. Her dad actually was letting me borrow his truck and I slept in it a couple of nights, and I slept at her house a couple of nights. So it was just, it was tough, but she encouraged me to go to my dad and talk to him, and he had to go and talk to my stepmom to see if it was okay. And he came back like the next day and was like, yeah, you can come live with us. And side note, a little later, I found out that the only reason why he let me live there was because it took away all his child support. Like, he didn't have to do any back pay. And that erased a lot of debt for him. So later on, that was kind of a tough pill to swallow. Here, I thought my dad really wanted a relationship with me after all these years. And there's definitely an ulterior motive there. So that was difficult. But my dad, I partied with him a lot. I smoked weed with him. We drank a lot. I remember sitting in his truck several nights talking about, or, kind of arguing who was sober enough to drive to the store to get more beer. I was 16. And then that was going into my senior year. So I turned 17 that year when I was with him, living with him, and changed schools and everything. I was a straight A student up until this time in my life. And so I kind of just felt like nobody really cared. So why should I, kind of thing? Like, all of this time I had, wanted to gain everybody's approval and couldn't seem to do that. So what was the point in trying so hard anymore? So yeah, then I met my kid's father during that time. He actually was my drug dealer. And he, me and him were just really good friends at first. And then through all the partying and mutual friends and that kind of thing, we kind of grew a connection. And then at 18, I became pregnant, with my son. And then by 19, I had him. But it turned into a very abusive relationship. On both ends. We were just very toxic for one another, but a lot of physical abuse. We ended up being homeless together. I couldn't imagine not being near him, or, so I remember being pregnant, following him around from house to house, and just couldn't imagine not being with him, and so worried about him, what he was doing if I wasn't with him. So again, super toxic.
The drugs progress from smoking weed to drinking alcohol to
quickly. Within 6 months of me even starting marijuana and drinking, I was doing cocaine. And I did it with him. We partied together a lot. And I just remember him always like telling me how much I could have. It was so controlling, but like, I think that was part of the addiction too, was like, I wanted someone to tell me what I needed to do. And I think part of that was probably from being controlled as just the way I grew up, kind of. There was a lot of controlling behaviors in my home. So I think part of it was like a comfortability, or like, anyways, it reminded me of like some of my past, I guess. But anyway, yeah. So after I had my son, cause I didn't do cocaine while I was pregnant with him. I didn't drink or any of that. But, as soon as I had him, it was right back to the craziness and trying to keep up with his dad and that whole, lifestyle. And then when my son was 9 months old, his father went to prison for 8 months. And during that 8-month span, I got even more involved in like selling and putting myself out there and putting myself in situations that were sketchy, to say the least. And my son stayed with, like, I would pay friends to keep him, or my grandmother would come over and watch him. But I wasn't nearly as present as I should have been. But I mean, I did some really sketchy stuff. I would go to what do they call them, trap houses, and spend quite a bit of time there. And I thought thought I was living the dream. I felt like in some weird way that I had achieved some level of status or something in that.
Feels like freedom in addiction, right? You felt
Right.
free.
Yeah. And so then his dad got back out, and it was even more abusive than before. And I think it was because he had heard these stories about the things that I was doing while he was in prison, and it made him really mad. He felt like I was out there. So here was this good girl before turned bad. And I think in his eyes, I was then tainted. So that was, again, very abusive. Well, then he came back home, and I got pregnant with my daughter during that time. And then once I was 13 weeks pregnant, he went back to prison. So for 4.5 years. So he literally was out long enough to get me pregnant. And during that time, that is when my addiction really took over. I was still able to maintain. I mean, I was in school. I kept a job. I lived such a dual life. Nobody knew I was in addiction. I had so many people fooled because I did keep a full-time job. I did have my own apartment. I didn't lose anything, not even my kids, when I probably should have. But I was able to just live that double life. And I think that was part of what was finally the breaking point, was that I was so tired of trying to make everyone believe I was somebody I wasn't. I feel like I'm all over the place, so I apologize. But yeah, so my daughter was born, and I met another drug dealer who was quite a bit more known or established in the game than my kid's father. And so I felt like I had leveled up and achieved, again, another status or level to the game. And that's when I became addicted to Opanas and Roxy's, and I never ended up doing heroin. That wasn't necessarily like the big thing at that time, because we could get the painkillers pretty easily through his grandmother's prescription. So that was falling asleep all the time. I was a zombie. I remember I couldn't drive more than 30 minutes at a time without having to pull over and walk around. It was pathetic. He was extremely abusive and pulled a gun on me one time, and at my apartment with my kids at the apartment. And
how old were they then?
So my daughter would have been right around 2, so my son would have been around 6. And I remember the neighbor calling the police. The police showed up, and I had actually locked him on my balcony. He ended up jumping off when the police came and, fled or whatever. But DSS was involved after that because my kids were there, and it was, a domestic violence situation. But I ended the relationship then because I was so scared of losing my kids. But with that came major withdrawals from the drugs that I got from him that I no longer had access to. So I turned to old resources to find things. And I spent, all kinds of money on getting what I needed to even function, because it was not even to get high anymore. It was literally to make it through the day. And then I got to where I was so tired of just maintaining, and I wasn't getting high anymore. I switched my addiction to Adderall and back to cocaine. and I felt more productive, and then I was a different person and a better person. So I thought. But yeah, so through all of that, my son became very uh, independent as far as helping take care of his sister and doing things that a 6-year-old shouldn't have to do as far as taking care of his little sister. And then their dad got out of prison, and we tried to get back together. The first 3 months were great. We were just a little happy family, making it work. I was trying to be sober because, he got out of prison, so I felt like that was the right thing to do. I wanted him to stay sober. That lasted a night. And I think all of the emotions were so overwhelming that I felt like I just needed to get high in order to even deal with the realness of the situation. Because there was so much that we never addressed, so much trauma and pain that neither one of us ever worked through, and then trying to just everything's happy go lucky. It was an awful recipe, or a recipe for disaster. So that night he came home. I went to my drug dealer's house down the road and got high, and then came back, and that was our first fight. And then, but it wasn't like a fight like had it been before. It was more of an argument. So again, the first 3 months wasn't that bad. The second 3 months, I didn't even want to look at him. I was repulsed by him. And then he put his hands on me 3 times. And the second time was in front of the kids. And it was over drugs and whose they were and why they were mine and why they were his, and just back and forth. And my kids were right there. And that was super traumatic my kids still remember it. And after that moment, I was pretty much done with him. And then he was still living with me. And I remember him coming home one night. The last time that he put his hands on me, he had came home that night and he was super drunk. And he just started hitting on me for no reason. And I'm sure he was just super angry. So after that, I was completely done. I didn't even speak to him again. And my mom was the mediator. So when he wanted to see the kids and stuff, he went through my mom. I literally did not talk to him after that moment. And it was shortly after that I had all these different people. I had a drug dealer that lived in my apartment complex, so she was over a lot. I would even watch her kids, and she would, let me get high, while I say this stuff, and I'm like, whoa. Stuff we do in addiction is ridiculous. Anyway, so she would, give me a supply while I was watching her kids, and all these different people would come in and out. We would have parties in the evening, and again, my kids were there. It was horrendous. And then finally my son went to my mom and said, Nana, I don't want to live with my mom anymore. He got picked on in school for smelling cigarette smoke. So my mom took my kids. And at the moment, that was definitely my rock bottom. You're a parent. That is the one job that you had and you screwed it up. So I tried to figure it out for 4 months and tried to clean my apartment, tried to quit smoking in my apartment, and tried to keep people out of my apartment. But it was like a revolving door, and people would show up without me, calling them or wanting them there. And it just was the established hangout spot. So that was really hard. I remember my kids came and stayed with me for about 4 days. And then my son went back to my mom and was like, Mommy hadn't changed. So that was my like breaking moment. And I remember I was doing my homework because I was still in school through all of this. And I was sitting there in my living room and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, say you finish your degree, you don't have your kids, you're partying all the time, you're miserable. What are you going to do with this degree, Caleb? So I got off that screen and I went to Google and I started researching rehabilitation centers. And that's when I found Freedom House. But it was crazy. I spent like an hour and a half looking for drug rehabilitation centers and kept getting roadblocks. And I would call, and it was a 14-day program, or it was $32,000 a month. It was ridiculous. And I was like, Lord, if this is not, like, I know this is not what you have for me. Like, I'm sitting in this dungy looking apartment and my kids want nothing to do with me. Like, this can't be your plan for my life. And I scrolled through the Google searches, and at the very bottom, it said Christian Rehabilitation Centers. And I had no clue that even existed. Like, I didn't know there was a differentiation of the two. And clicked on it, and Freedom House was the first one that popped up. And it was far enough from my family that I knew that could be a good thing, but close enough that I wouldn't lose touch. Because at that time, I didn't realize how toxic everybody was. So I called, put in an application, and within 2 weeks, I was admitted. And the whole point of me choosing Freedom House mainly was because my kids could come stay with me. I didn't realize once I got into the program that my mom wouldn't allow my kids to come stay with me for various reasons, but I knew that if I went back, nothing was going to change and I would be going back to the exact same mess. So I decided that I would stick it out, and I'm so grateful that I did, because here I am 6.5 years later and been sober since.
What was that first month or so, or first week like when you came to Freedom House? Because you hadn't been sober. How long were you sober before coming?
I cannot remember in the 11 years of my addiction more than, aside from my pregnancies, more than 24 hours being sober. So it had been quite some time since I was probably pregnant with my daughter. And at the time that I came to Freedom House, she was 4.5. So 4.5 years. I was exhausted. I just remember like not wanting to do anything. We have morning chores and such, and I didn't want to get up and do anything. But after the first week, it got much better. But yeah, first week was tough.
What were the relationships like with the staff at Freedom House when you got here?
So at the interview, so we used to come in, or I had to come in for an interview process. Actually in the house at the program site, and I just remember walking in and being like, just a sense of like peace, and there wasn't, I was invited with like this warmness and realness, and it was really cool because it was like, this is how it is, this is what it is. You know, these are, you know, our rules and, you know, our policies. It was just so black and white, and it was so nice because it was just, here it is. Do you want it or not? And it was good not to have any gray after living in gray for so long, I guess, for a lack of better words.
So it sounds like you were trying to find that kind of structure in other ways, right? Now you're finding it in a new way with
right.
New environment. Yeah.
And I didn't even know that I needed it, you know, and honestly, I didn't know that I deserved it for my whole life. I just thought that it was normal. My life, this was normal. It was never going to be any different. Although I had this like longing that things should be different, I didn't think I deserved different. Like, this was just my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
what were some of the biggest struggles in that time? So you kind of come in and you're getting used to the schedule and how things go. You're kind of tired in the morning. And what were, besides the exhaustion, what were some of those struggles in the first the first part of the program?
Well, after 30 days, I found out my kids wouldn't be able to come with me, live with me, and that was horrible. My mom barely answered the phone when I would call my kids. We get one phone call a week, so I was barely even able to talk to them. So it was like my motivation for getting sober, I didn't even have access to. So that was really tough. And then some of our grief work or recovery work was really heavy. So facing some of those traumas that I had suppressed for years, that was a struggle for sure.
You mentioned before, like sitting at the computer and saying, like, Lord, this can't be the plan you have for my life. What were some of the when did you kind of start to kind of cry out a little bit more, trying to seek the Lord here at Freedom House? When did that process like really start to come about?
So the minute I found out my kids couldn't come, that was when I was like, I was so angry, just in that life in general. But it was like once I accepted that God was going to see me through, and that if he had brought me this far, he wasn't going to leave me, and he wasn't going to complete it. So that, yeah, definitely when I found out my kids wouldn't be able to come, that's when I knew I just had to surrender it all to him.
When did you first get to see your kids? Do you remember that day?
Yes. So they finally got to come stay a weekend with me. And the reunification was great, but they didn't want to be here. They couldn't have their Xbox. They couldn't eat the stuff that they wanted to. They were still angry at me. I mean, my son's the one that said he didn't want to live with me. So, and I think that was part of why my mom didn't feel like it was a big deal that they come live with me, because, you know, was I going to stay sober? Was this actually a real thing? You know, were my kids going to move here and then have to move right back? So I get it. I'm not angry. I don't blame anybody for how it turned out. But I was super excited, but my kids were not. So it was kind of a letdown. And it was humbling because it made me realize, like, to the extent at which I really hurt my kids. So.
How did that get better? Did they end up staying, or did they leave to go back to your mom's?
So they stayed that weekend. It was a very hard weekend. And I hate to say this, but I could not wait for them to leave. I didn't know how to handle them. I wasn't equipped. My mom was the mom. I took a back seat to her. So I didn't know how to parent. I didn't know really who my kids were. I didn't know how to relate to them. So, and then being so angry with me and all of the vices that they had back home, they didn't have here. It was just so hard. And it got better, but it didn't get better for a while. It didn't get better until after they came to live with me in aftercare.
Were they doing like weekly? Every weekend were they coming to visit?
No, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 times in the year, 10 months that I was in the program that they came and stayed with me. And it would get better, I think, because they realized like how they could see me changing. So it would get better as far as like finding things to do. And I wrote them every week. So, you know, we had things to talk about. We did crafts. We would have like dance offs and stuff. So we filmed things, and that was really cool to get to know my kids. And that's one reason why we don't have technology and stuff, because we remove those distractions so it can be hands-on and get to rebuild those relationships, because they are so broken.
So you moved towards graduation. You finished the first year of the program.
Yeah.
How did you feel as the weeks came up to graduation? You're seeing your kids more. You've been sober for 10 months. You're establishing healthy relationships, boundaries. What did it feel like coming up to graduation?
I was scared. I was like, how am I going to do this with every, like, I honestly did not tell my mom that I was graduating. I didn't tell anybody from my past that I was graduating. I knew that I needed time to establish myself outside of, the parameters of the program and the structure of the program, without anybody. I just knew that I needed time to get on my feet. And I was so scared that my mom would try to reel me back in, or because we were so enmeshed. Our relationship was so toxic. And I was just so scared that I didn't talk to my mom for a year after I graduated. I had to set those boundaries, and I had to be very clear at me being a different person and that we were separate people. And I needed time to get a job, get a car, just get all those things established. So I was very, very nervous about doing it on my own. That was the first time I ever did life on my own. I mean, I was homeless and that kind of thing, but that was surviving, not thriving. So I was super nervous.
What was aftercare like? So did you get a job? What happens at Freedom House that second year? What does that look like?
So I was fortunate that I had maintained my license. So they had a car that was donated and they gave it to me. I got a job at Lowe's Home Improvement that was actually within walking distance of the house. So until I was able to get the title transferred and all that, I was able to walk to work. And we still have, chores that, we're still expected to maintain the home that we're given to live in. We don't have to pay rent. We did have to pay utilities. Excuse me. But the main thing is saving up money so you can get your own place after that year. If you have any kind of legal fees or, you need to obtain your license, that kind of stuff, that's what that year is for. If you need, apply for a housing voucher or, any of that, but you're also continuing all that you've learned from Freedom House. You continue to go to groups. You continue to be a part of the community. So it just doesn't stop after the first year of residential. It's just a continuation.
Were you still striving? Now you have this freedom, right? You're going to work. You're meeting new people. Still involved in the program, probably. Mm-hmm. What about struggles with substances and alcohol or other drugs or thoughts, or what was that? Tell us about if that was a struggle at all, or you just didn't really. There wasn't a struggle with that anymore.
There wasn't a struggle with that. My main concern, so I worked so hard to get my sobriety and get my independence that I knew I had to fight just as hard to keep it. So we do a relapse prevention plan at Freedom House, and I stuck to that to a T. I wanted all the accountability that they could offer. I didn't give out my phone number to people I worked with. We had a flip phone. We didn't have smartphones in the beginning, so that kept us off of Facebook and other temptations that we might have. I didn't go into Sheetz because I used to do drugs in the bathroom at Sheetz and used to drink, and Sheetz was like my main gas station. So there were just so many things that I stayed away from. I didn't go back home. There was a lot of things that I identified as triggers or potential triggers, so I stayed away from them. It sounds horrible, but my main concern and fear was my mom.
Taking the kids, or what would just the relationship itself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she didn't. I didn't have my kids yet. I graduated in I graduated in March, and they didn't come stay with me until June because they finished school and stuff. I didn't tell my mom that I had graduated until the beginning of June. Mm-hmm. And so once school let out, she came and dropped them off to stay with me. So I just feared that I wouldn't be strong enough to resist her. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How were the kids this time around coming to stay with you? What was that relationship like with them?
it was definitely a transition, because now it wasn't just they get to go back home. They still didn't get to bring Xboxes and all of the things. We still followed the Daniel Plan diet, so there wasn't junk food in the house, and I couldn't afford to go out to eat, so we didn't go out to eat a lot.
Because you're still in Freedom House at this point. You're still
Yeah,
in Freedom.
absolutely. I had only been graduated like 3 months, so I it was a process, and then within that year, their father passed away that next March. So I graduated March of 2018, March of 2019.
Was he in prison?
Away. No, he was out, but he died of an overdose. And my kids were so mad at me because during that time that they lived with me, I wouldn't let them go visit my mom or their dad, because I knew that their dad was still in active addiction, and I didn't want them to be around that, for obvious reasons. And so they were super mad at me, told me they hated me. And I remember just having to let them express all of their anger towards me, all of their anger towards what they have went through. But there was a lot of healing and a lot of trust built through that process. And my son, who of course was older, I looked at both of them and said, this is the reason why I wasn't letting you go see him. You easily could have been the one to find him, if you would have been there. And my son understood that. My daughter, she had painted like this superhero image of who her dad was, because she didn't get very much time with him, because she was 4.5 before he got out of prison, and then she only had like a year and a half with him before he passed away, or before they came and lived with me, and then he passed away. So they had a really rough childhood, and that was it was a lot to overcome. And there's no way I could have done it on my own. And there were times that, I sat in group and just sobbed because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help them. I didn't think I was capable of being the mom that they needed. And so angry at myself for what I had put them through because of addiction.
So the second, coming up to the end of aftercare, that second year, was there again that kind of anxiousness that you had towards graduating the first year? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate that I had a really good position at Lowe's. I had been promoted. So financially, I felt pretty secure. However, I was really nervous about where I was moving to. This would have been the first time that I wasn't getting assistance for my apartment and stuff. So I was doing it all on my own, which was exciting and empowering because I was doing it. But it was also kind of nerve-wracking because I was doing it all by myself, but it turned out to be really, really good. And well, I'll say that actually my car was stolen from that apartment because of the location. So that's okay, character building. And ended up actually moving back onto Freedom House property because they just couldn't imagine me living in such a dangerous area. So I had to reestablish, kind of get back on my feet to figure out where is a safe place for me to live because I'm not from this area. So that was challenging, but it was good.
How old were the kids when you moved back onto the property temporarily?
Let's see. So I guess 10 and 6, because my daughter would have been first grade. Yeah. So 6 and 2. Mm-hmm. And now they're 14 and 11.
How are they doing now?
They're doing phenomenal. My son, he's finally all caught up. He's in honors classes his first year in high school. Plays football and wrestling. Was the captain of both the football team and wrestling team last year, and as a freshman, he's wrestling varsity, and he's just doing great. And he is quite the leader. And it's funny, him and his sister, you know, they go back and forth, but he still has kept that bond with her, and he loves her so much. And he's a pretty incredible kid. And then my daughter, she is super impressive, extremely talented, loves to draw, very musical, and, you know, just all the things. She loves to do her own hair, and yeah, and she's just a brainiac. She has no issues in school whatsoever. And I'm just like blown away by
It's a miracle, huh?
It really is. It's like, not me. I struggled. But yeah, they are doing phenomenal. And we as a group, like, as the three of us are doing really well. And I mean, I've had people tell me they've never seen a teenage boy love his mom the way that he loves me. And it is such a good feeling because, you know, this is the kid that didn't want anything to do with me. So God restored it, man.
Tell us what you're doing now.
So now I currently work at Freedom House. I started in August of 2023. And I get to give back to all these wonderful ladies and motivate them and share what the Lord's done in my life. So he's going to do it for them. You know, he's no respecter of persons. And it's just so cool to watch them transform and fall in love with the Lord and start believing in his promises and surrendering their will to him, and just finding hope, man. And just seeing them restore their relationships with their kids, because I know the pain that is. But it's really cool. It's a blessing to get to work here. It doesn't even feel like a job most days. I mean, some days, yes. But most days you get such a blessing out of it, it doesn't feel like a job.
We love you. We're so proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
What would you say to a single mom that's watching this video right now that just feels like there's no hope and their kind of whole world's caving in? What would you say to them if they were sitting here right now?
That's a perfect opportunity to surrender and get help. When you hit your rock bottom, that's your opportunity to ask the Lord to fix it. And you can see such a miraculous turn of events if you'll give it over to him. There is hope. There are people out there that will love you through all of it. There are people out there that believe in you when you don't believe in yourself, because you're so deprived of everything. There are people that want to be that for you, and you don't have to stay in that depression and that hole, that pit. There's hope, man.
Amen. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Love you.
Yeah, I love you too.